Hey, welcome, vets. Eric, the Bearded Vet here. Today I'm with Donny Whitton, who is our lead Pathfinder here at United Veterans Assistance. Donny, welcome, man. Glad you're here.
Thanks, brother. Nice to be here. Always good.
Oh yeah. So for those of you that don't know us, I know we're new and this is our first live. So I just wanted to introduce ourselves a little bit so you can learn a little bit more about us. So again, I'm Eric, the Bearded Vet. I'm a 100% disabled Air Force veteran. I got out in 2006, and just like I fought my way through the VA process. Started at having no rating at all, jumping to 10%, moving up the ranks to 20, 30, getting up to 50, 70, and eventually hitting that 100% P&T. Donnie, what about yourself?
Yeah, the same. Actually, so I'm a U.S. Army combat vet. I got out also in '06. Despite being medevac from Iraq and everything else, it took me until 2019 to, well, actually, I think 2021 when I was awarded, but my effective date was 2019. So there was a nice little bit of back pay there when it finally came through. But it was a fight. It was a battle, and so I can truly appreciate that fight. It's was giving me the passion for serving veterans, and what sad and breaks my heart is the vets I see that have been fighting this battle 30, 40, even 50 years. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no, I completely understand because we see it every day, right? With the veterans that we talk to and that we help. Dealing with the VA isn't always the easiest thing or the fastest process. And having gone through it ourselves, it's one of those things that unless you've been through it, it's really hard to explain the frustration that the veteran feels every time you get and see those denial letters, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest things that deters a lot of veterans from not only filing but continue to file, especially for conditions that they know that they have and are dealing with on a daily basis. So one of those topics is sleep apnea, and that's what we're here to talk to you today. And there's a lot of misconception when it comes to sleep apnea. What it is, how it's rated, what the VA is looking for, and specifically how veterans can get that 50% rating. So you want to touch a little bit on sleep apnea?
Yeah, for sure. So it's great that we start with this topic because right now sleep apnea is the most talked about VA disability topic, and that's for a good reason. There's a lot of fear surrounding these proposed changes. For those of you who don't know, there's some proposed changes, and so we're here to cut through that noise and give you the facts. There are a lot of people out there that are fear mongering for clickbait, trying to pump it up, get you guys revved up so they get more clicks and more advertising. So we're here to give you the truth. Just cut through, get rid of that anxiety. But this information is for education purposes. You don't go out and start firing off claims based on this information. Everyone's situation is different. Everyone needs to look at their own history, medical records, in-service events, all that stuff individually on your own, and not just start grabbing one piece of information, thinking that is the end all be all and firing off claims.
I think that's important that you say that because everybody's condition is different, right? No two claims are going to be exactly alike. And I think it's important that veterans realize that and understand that when it comes to the claim process, just because a veteran that you talk to who may have similar symptoms as you was approved, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to, right? There's a lot of differences that come out of it. And one of the biggest ones is how you file, right? And that's really the biggest part when it comes to the claim process is filing correctly, filing right the first time is going to save you so much hassle in the long run. I can tell from experience because I was one of those veterans at the very beginning. I was out there doing the spray and pray method, right? I was just clicking everything I could find, submitting every single claim under the sun and just trying to see what would stick. and it worked with a couple of different things. Right? I was lucky, getting tinnitus and hearing loss, were the two first claims that I got right out the gate without very much work. But then after that, everything else was hard. And sleep apnea was one of the big ones that I just figured, hey, I have sleep apnea. I've been diagnosed. The VA gave me a CPAP machine. So it's a no-brainer. But I did, the common mistake that a lot of veterans do was I filed it with that information, but I didn't have a clear nexus, right? There was nothing that said my service was what caused my sleep apnea. Yes, I have it. Yes, the VA is treating me for it, but nothing in the record said that it was my service that caused it. So when I got that denial, I was really upset. I mean, I couldn't understand why, right? Like, I mean, I've got it. The VA recognizes that they gave me the CPAP machine, but I was still denied. Like, why? And I spent hours and years filing high level reviews, filing supplemental claims, filing everything else, trying to get it approved, and nothing. Right. And it's one of those things where if I would have done it right the first time, done my research, I could have gotten it service connected a lot sooner. But I think that's where the education process comes in, right? And that's one of the big things that here at United Veterans Assistance we do. And do you want to touch on exactly what separates us and what makes us different?
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like for those of you that have seen Happy Gilmore, since there was recently a sequel, hopefully that more of you have than just us older gentlemen. When he gets that hole in one, he's like, man, I should just make it in the first shot every time. That's way easier. And so to piggyback on what Eric's saying there, I mean, that's what we try to do. There's 3 elements of service connection: the in-service event, current diagnosis, and the nexus. And nexus is just a fancy word for connection that the VA uses. And if you look at the in-service event, what happened in service, which can be replaced by an already service-connected disability, and the current diagnosis, the nexus would be the bridge that connects those two. If there, imagine a river in between, a bridge connecting 2 pieces of land, kind of what that looks like. So what we do is we ensure that every time we can, which is more often than not, almost every time, we are filing claims that are fully developed claims. We try to eliminate the need for the VA examiners and or contracted examiners at all. And when you do that, not only are you more likely to get a favorable opinion, you're a lot less likely to get additional exams. You don't skip the gathering evidence phase, but you don't spend very long there because there's no additional evidence to gather. They take a look and hey, and most of those VA redders are disabled veterans themselves. Despite the bad name they have gathered over the years, they're not out there trying to look for a reason to deny, but they have a system that is very difficult to deal with. They have to, they have to play within the rules. They want to keep their job. And there's also a lot of pressure for them to move through claims very quickly. And so the harder you make it for them, the more likely they are to either make errors and or to deny you. So make it easy for them to approve, have a complete evidentiary picture. And so after the 3 elements of service connection, that's where that education piece comes in really important, because then you're contending for your rating. And that means being educated on your symptomology, and not just your symptomology, but how the symptomology that you display equates in VA terms. I see a lot of veterans get underrated because they go in and they don't even know what the VA is looking for necessarily. And a great example of that is, people that have really bad anxiety and get stressed out, and it brings on these migraine headaches. So they go into a mental health appointment and they spend the whole time speaking about their migraines, and that's an entirely different condition. So they get way underrated on their mental health. And that's not because their mental health should not be rated higher. It's because they didn't speak other symptoms properly. And so that's kind of where that education and medical evidence and putting all that together comes into play. And, and that's what we do. We sit down with you, we go through line by line, and put together a roadmap. And I always say my job is to give you the 50-meter target, and your job is to knock it down. I'll figure out where we're going next. You don't worry about that. Just trust that I know, and you keep shooting that 50-meter target.
Yeah, I think that's important to know is, you have to trust in the process, right? And one of the things that when you're doing this alone, it's easy to get discouraged, right? But when you have somebody like a Pathfinder, by your side who's helping you through this process, that is kind of being your voice and your biggest supporter to keep pushing forward, because it's so easy to get discouraged and just give up, when it comes to the VA process. And when you have somebody by your side who's kind of encouraging you on and telling you, hey, it's okay, we'll get through this, we'll figure it out, we can file this way, we can do this, let's relook at the plan, that's what makes the biggest difference. And with United Veterans Assistance, the biggest advantage is we're disabled veterans ourselves. We know what the VA is looking for. We've been through the process, we know exactly what they're going through, right? The anxiety, what it feels like, to kind of waiting for that claim, logging on to va.gov every day, refreshing twice, 3 times a day to see if anything changed and updated, and that in itself should be a VA disability, right? Having to go through and wait and check that out, so, when it comes to sleep apnea, the VA rates sleep apnea at 0, 10, 30, 50, and 100, right? And, it all comes down to your symptoms, what you have diagnosed, and are you using a CPAP machine, right? Do you want to touch a little bit on those, Donnie?
Yeah, so the current rating is, and here's a distinction. The way it's written is, if a doctor says you require a CPAP, you're not actually required to use it. If the doctor says you're required, and that's an important, a CPAP and or CPAP-like device. So it also does not have to be a CPAP. And that's an important distinction, especially for a lot of us that have comorbid issues like PTSD and mental health, because a lot of us have a very hard time using that machine consistently. I've fought with it off and on for years. I can't have anything feel like it's suffocating me when I'm sleeping. Yep. Or, it's just, I'm not getting sleep, period. So that's a very important distinction when you're doing an exam for your sleep apnea, and knowing that also. Anything that does not require the use of a CPAP or CPAP-like device is below the 50, and the 100 means you are in some seriously bad shape on your sleep apnea, and I don't wish that on anybody. And that's just kind of keeping the ratings simple for the sleep apnea. I've been doing this a very long time. I've served tens of thousands of vets, and I've only seen 200% sleep apnea ratings in that entire time. And thankfully so, because you probably have some severe heart conditions related to that, if that's the case. And then, so the reason that sleep apnea is the most talked about disability right now is because of the proposed changes. And this is where that fear mongering comes in. A lot of people are out there using these proposed changes to drive up their clicks and market content. This proposed change started in 2022, and we had a supplemental notice in 2024. And the final rule has not dropped yet. Right now, nothing's changed. The CPAP prescription still equals a 50% rating. What the proposed rule would do, if your CPAP controls your symptoms, you could be rated at 0%. Only veterans whose treatment doesn't work would keep 50%. So kind of like for me, because the CPAP doesn't work, I would be good. But also, So the window's still open, and we don't really know for how long that this change could go into effect. Mid to late 2026 with a 60-day buffer after publication is kind of what's expected. But if you're already rated and or get rated this change, you're grandfathered in under 38 CFR 3.951 grandfathered. So, don't trip. Just because it could change doesn't mean that it's going to change for you if you're already there. Now, if you request an increase after the new rule, they can reevaluate you under the new criteria. So think carefully before doing that. If you request an increase on a different condition, you're less likely to be evaluated for that one condition, unless you're filing a claim secondary to sleep apnea or requesting an increase that's on a condition that's secondary to sleep apnea. And then you also run that risk. But we can go ahead and we can just kill the rumor entirely that the sleep apnea is being removed from the rating table. It is not. It's still going to be there.
And I think that's important to kind of point out is, we can get ahead of this and kind of future proof, your claim by, working on it now, right? Get it submitted before this drops, get that rating in and get yourself protected, right? I mean, and one of the biggest things that you can do is work with a company like UVA who specializes in this and can help you make sure that we're maximizing, that rating for you. And what'll come out of this is, if you start working on your claim process now, right, we get you service connected, and hopefully, you're one of the veterans who can, if you qualify for it, can get to that 100% permanent and total. That permanent and total rating, can't be, or I say can't. It normally isn't ever reduced unless you ever file a new claim. But at that point, once you're 100% permanent total, there's not really a reason for you to continue filing a claim. There are special circumstances, but for the most part, you won't ever need to. And that's kind of the whole plan is get that rating protected, get it secured, and get the benefits and compensation that you're deserved, by law. And I think it's also big to kind of note that I think where a lot of veterans kind of hesitate is they're not sure, what to do and kind of where to go from here. I mean, a lot of veterans, like myself, who are in that point where they have that rate, they have the diagnosis, they have that CPAP machine, but they're not sure how to actually service connect it. And what a lot of veterans don't realize is just because you don't have something in your records that specifically say that you had sleep apnea while you were in, that, you're out of the running. And that's not true. So to give you an example, right. And I know I talked to you earlier, Donny, about this, like for myself, when I filed and I was denied, I thought it was over. But when the VA came out with their burn pit presumptives, I ended up filing for rhinitis and sinusitis, direct service connect to the burn pits when I was deployed to Qatar during OIF, OEF. And I got service connected. It came back as a 0% service connected for rhinitis, but that 0% opened the door for me to be able to file my sleep apnea secondary to that already service connected rhinitis. And when I filed it as a supplemental claim secondary to that rhinitis, it went through within 1 month. I got 50% service connected to sleep apnea without any hesitation because I already had that nexus that showed that connection for my service, right? So I was able to tell that story, bridge that gap, and show the VA, hey, my condition is caused by, my time in service. And not only that, it's already caused by a currently rated service condition. And, I was able to go that secondary pathway, which a lot of veterans don't realize that, you have your direct service connect, which is your hardest way to get service connected. And then you have your secondary route, which a lot of the times is a lot easier and stronger because, like I said, you already have that kind of built-in nexus that you can use to your advantage.
Yeah, see, mine went the other way. I filed secondary to PTSD with a Nexus and got it approved that way. And I remember, you know, back then I dealt with my mental health issues by spending a lot of time in the gym. So I was really lean. And after my sleep apnea diagnosis went in my blue button report, my VA medical records, I remember reading in there, and the doctor who I never met, because you do the test and then they go off the test in your records and put the notes in. Put in there that I was my sleep apnea was most likely induced by my obesity, because and I was about 8% body fat. I was so mad. I went back to the hospital and went to the sleep study area. I was like, "Where's the doctor at?" Probably that was probably a symptom of my mental health, going back there to confront the doctor.
Well, and that's one of the big things too is, a lot of times veterans don't even realize what's in their medical records either, right? Because like you said, there's times where the VA doctors will just put notes in, they'll put their own things. And if you're not staying on top of it and actually reading those, you're also doing a disservice to yourself by not, being on top of it and making sure that there's accurate notes and information in your records. Because a lot of times that could also, affect you during the claims process as they're looking through it, as they're pulling up that information. So, it's great that you were able to go in there, find that, to kind of get that, get that cleared up, because that's something that could definitely, have gone either way, during that kind of diagnosis. So, and I think that's also an important thing to kind of go into next is, what are the top mistakes that you've seen that veterans make when it comes to filing for sleep apnea?
Well, number one is thinking, and this does not just apply to sleep apnea. It's thinking, and you kind of covered this earlier, just because the VA diagnoses you, it's service related or connected. I mean, I've been out since 20 years now. We've been out 20 years, Eric. Wow, you're old, bro.
Who's stopping, man?
If I go over here and I stub my toe on the couch and break my toe and I get diagnosed with a broken toe by the VA, that is not related to service, and it is not going to be service connected. Just because the VA diagnoses you with something does not mean it should be service connected, right? So that's probably the number one. I don't know how many thousands of times I've heard, well, the VA diagnosed me. Okay. And the next biggest one is not getting a Nexus when a Nexus is needed. You were able to and I'll say sneak by, especially because in your situation, they reopened it on a supplemental without a Nexus. Sometimes, a rater won't even open it if you don't have a Nexus on the supplemental. They should in your case. That was the right thing to do, but sometimes they just won't. And I think that it goes back to them moving at a fast pace, and that increases the chance of making mistakes. And then when I see a veteran get underrated, it's typically because they did not get the necessity of a CPAP properly marked on their DBQ. The best sleep apnea package is a fully developed claim, Nexus letter, DBQ, and submit.
Oh yeah, and I think one of the big things too that a lot of veterans forget as well, not only for sleep apnea but for any claim, is they forget how powerful their own personal statements and getting buddy letters are as well. And I think that's also a part where a lot of veterans miss is, that's personal statement, and those buddy letters give the rater an inside look on how your conditions affect you on a daily basis with factual corroboration from somebody who knows you, that's seen you, that lives with you. And those buddy letters can be from your wife, your children, your over 18 children, right? People that you served with. Those are firsthand accounts of people that can say, hey, I've seen my husband, he sleeps, he snores loudly. He stops breathing at night. I have to push him. I have to shake him. I have to, turn him on his side. Those are things that unless, you have a video recording, you don't know, right? So these are the things that are important to kind of showcase, because this gives that raider a firsthand look on what you're dealing with on a daily basis. And that personal statement that you write on your own, again, that is your time to show the raider, what you deal with on a daily basis, and how it affects you on your worst days, right? And I think that's important to kind of point out, because a lot of times, if you go in for a CMP exam, or you go in, the first question that they ask you is, well, how are you doing today? And most people's just default answer is, oh, I'm great. Well, you just told the raider that you're in there for a CMP exam, that you're feeling great, and that already, you've already kind of shot yourself in the foot on being able to get what you deserve, and I think one of the biggest important parts also is, when you go in for a CMP exam, the moment you step out of your car, that CMP exam has already started, right? There's some places where they're looking at you already from the moment you got out of your car. How are you walking? Were you struggling? Did you need help? When you came in, were you happy? Were you excited? Were you doing, there's a lot of things that you don't realize that's going on that you're being evaluated on. And just that simple, how are you doing? Oh, I'm great. Can make the difference of 50%, a 30, even a 0% rating. So it's important to know that, don't minimize, your symptoms when you're going in. It's important to make sure that you're able to explain how your condition is affecting you on your worst day. And it's important to say your worst day, because you want the VA to rate you appropriately on how it affects you. And being able to showcase that for your worst day is, how you should be rated. Because, yes, everyone's going to have their good days, right? I have good days. Donny has good days. But a lot of the times, more so than not, a lot of my days are probably worse than, I have worse days than I have good days. And it's important to showcase that, because it's not going to say that when you go in for that exam, or you're talking to that examiner, you're in that CMP, that's going to be the worst pain that you're in. But you want to convey how it affects you on that worst day, right? So it's important to make sure that you're able to get that out, be open, honest, make yourself very vulnerable in that situation, because that's going to be the difference from being, approved or denied. And the other thing too is, do not, under any circumstances, do not miss a CMP exam. If you miss a CMP exam, you are basically setting yourself up for an automatic denial.
Correct. And by the way, just in case anyone is confused, he is saying worst day, not birthday, right? So don't go in and talk about your birthday. Unless it's your birthday, you can cry if you want to. Then maybe your birthday. But worst day, all right. It's also important to understand that the element of service connection, your etiology, is important. So typically, by percentage of success, secondary to sinusitis, rhinitis, deviated septum, asthma, those are the strongest ones. They have the highest chance of success, with secondary to mental health being down on the lower end. But this is where that education and our PAVE process come into play. What is the strongest for one person, or the highest percentage of success as a whole or overall, might not be the best option for you individually. Your situation might be better with a different etiology, which just means origin of service connection. And being able to find that and go that route is very important, because if you pick the wrong route based just on percentages of success as a whole, that could backfire, because it might not fit your personal picture.
Yeah, no, and again, this comes back to everybody's claim is different, right? No two claims are ever exactly the same. It's important to have that education and know, in your own case, what's going to be your strongest, way to go and file the claim with the highest percentage of it coming back approved, right? And the best way to do that is talk to somebody like yourself, one of our pathfinders who, can help you, see your current medical records, see, the current disabilities that you have, where you're at in the process, and help you, figure out a good path on how, we can actually help get these claims approved. Because, a lot of veterans don't realize that or know how to interpret, those denial letters, those approval letters, the information that's in their medical records, right? And that's where we come in, because we know how to read those, right? We know how to interpret them. We know how to say, oh, okay, look at this, the VA, in those denial letters, there's so much valuable information that people don't even realize. That if you pull up a denial letter, there's a little section that'll say favorable findings. That favorable findings is the difference between you being service connected or not, you getting a higher rating than what you got. And, I can give you a perfect example of that too. When I was going in and filing for mental health, so I filed in for, anxiety and depression, along with semantic symptom disorder. And I ended up getting a 50% rating. And I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I know my anxiety and my depression's super high. Why? Like, what's going on? And in the favorable findings, it specifically said that, while I was warranted a higher rating, I didn't mention, that I had suicidal ideations. And I was like, but I do. But again, I went in there and I didn't say it during the CMP exam. And because I didn't say it, it was the difference between that 50 and that 70% rating. So it's one of those things where, being open, honest, understanding what you're actually saying, so then when I got that denial letter, I was able to file, a supplemental claim. They gave me another CMP exam. I knew exactly what I didn't say beforehand, went back in, told my story, made sure they explained that there were suicidal ideations. Boom, 70% rating, right? So it's one of those things where when you go for that increase, it's important to use those denial letters to know what have that extra ammunition to help support your claim when you're going into it. So again, that's one of the things that, us from United Veterans Assistance, we've been through the process, right? We know what to look for. We're here to help you every step of the way, and that's one of the biggest things is if you have questions, schedule a call, right? You'll be able to sit down with one of our Pathfinders who will hear your case, who will see exactly where you're at, who will help understand whether this is a good fit for you or not. And our services aren't for everybody, right? But for those who is, we have had a lot of success helping veterans, just like you. We just, Donny specifically just helped an Army veteran within less than a month, went from got her 100% rating in less than a month.
From time of submission to approval, she went from 90% to SMCS, which goes through an extra round of eyes. A higher level rater has to review that because it's above 100%. And it went no CMP exam and went through in a week and a half. It's remarkable, honestly.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's a testament to our services and how much we care for the veterans that we serve is, at the end of the day, veterans helping veterans is huge, right? Because we want to make sure that every veteran gets the rating and compensation that they are deserved by law, and to make sure that everyone is properly rated. Does that mean that everyone's gonna get 100%? No, not everybody qualifies for 100%, but getting you properly rated opens the door to not only the compensation, but there's educational benefits. There are, property tax exemptions. There are healthcare benefits that come from the VA, getting your prescriptions covered. So there's a lot of benefits that come out of being properly rated. And at the end of the day, just because you file today and don't get 100%, nothing says that in 2, 5, 10 years from now, your ratings are going to get worse. You file an increase, then at that point, you may qualify for that 100%. And Jake, that's correct. So Jake just put a comment. You'll get 100% of what you should qualify for. That is 100% accurate. You get 100% of what you qualify for, and that's what's important to say, that not every veteran is going to get that 100%, but every veteran will get what they deserve.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of circle back a little bit earlier when we were talking about common mistakes or pitfalls. One of the things I left out, and I've seen this a lot, veterans filing a claim without even having a sleep study. So you have to have a diagnosis or you're just dead in the water. And the only way that they're going to order a sleep study when you file a claim for sleep apnea is if you're on a CPAP, you've been diagnosed before, and your last test was a long time ago. They might want to retest you, but even those have gotten fewer and fewer. But if you don't have one at all, you're not going to get a CNP exam because they're just going to shoot you down. Because you can't have a nexus if you don't have a diagnosis. Just period. There's nothing to connect. And then another big one I've seen too is not distinguishing between causation and aggravation. And you see that a lot on the mental health one, and that's where veterans end up shooting themselves in the foot. When they do get a CNP exam, they say, "Well, my PTSD causes my sleep apnea." No, it doesn't. There's not a causal relationship there. It can aggravate, but it cannot cause. Okay, and that's a really important distinction.
Well, I was going to say, I think one of the biggest problems too is I think a lot of veterans, they watch videos, they hear things, and they try to mimic a lot of the stuff that they hear and say, and see. And a lot of the times, a PCP or a CMP examiner is going to know if you go in there and say, "Oh, well, the causation of my symptom is this," they're going to be like, "Okay, you heard something, right? This isn't just how you talk normally." So it's important to just go in there and be yourself, right? And say, "Hey, my sleep apnea has gotten worse because of, my PTSD, and this is the reason why." Like, you don't have to try and use the words that you see, in some of these blogs or some of these other people on YouTube and things like that, but it's important to be educated so exactly, how to talk about these conditions, because you want to make sure that you're getting your point across, but you also don't want to go in there and sound overly coached or overly prepared on these things to where you're saying these big words, because there was one time where, again, at the very beginning when I was trying to file, I went in and I tried to do the same thing too. And, the CMP examiner stopped and said, "Can you tell me what that means? In your words, what does that mean?" And I was like, I was just like, I'm not, I don't know. Right. I was stuck. So, you don't want to go in there and kind of shoot yourself in the foot with trying to sound, overly confident or overly, knowing some of these big words or trying to figure these things out, because you may just kind of stump yourself at the same time. Right. So again, it's, if you have any concerns, any questions, or just want to see kind of where you're at in the process, it doesn't cost anything to talk to one of our Pathfinders, right? It'll actually open up the door and let us know and tell you, are you on the right track? Does this make sense? And if you want to, if you're on a computer and you can see it, there's a QR code that just popped up over here on the screen. You can scan that with your phone. It'll take you over. You can book a call with one of our Pathfinders. It'll be a quick 15-minute call just to give you an intro, tell you a little bit more about the services, and just see if it's a right fit for you. And if it's not, hey, no hard feelings, right? I mean, that's the best part about this is, we're not going to try and be overly aggressive. We're not going to oversell you, but if it's a good fit and we think we can help, we'll be more than willing to kind of work with you and walk this journey with you. Because what you get with United Veterans Assistance is you get a dedicated Pathfinder, just like Donny, who will walk this path with you every step of the way. And, the beautiful part about this is we won't stop working until you are content with the rating that you've gotten. And let me say that again, we don't promise anybody that we're going to get them to 100%, But just like Jake had said early in the comments, we will make sure that every veteran gets 100% of what they deserve, and we will continue to help you fight that until we get you there.
Yeah, while I was talking about fear mongering and this and that, there is a reality that our benefits are under attack. Washington Post just did this big investigative claim, and talking about how the sleep apnea claims have increased from 57,000 to 660,000. Yeah, because we didn't know what it was before. Just like TBI claims have gone through the roof because one, we didn't know what it was. Two, because we started getting blown up in Iraq left and right, in Afghanistan left and right. Of course they went up. That's what happens when you have 15 years of war on terror. You get more disabled veterans. Gas. And just like we were saying earlier, they're making it sound like we're giving away sleep apnea claims when the test itself is hard enough just to go to sleep to get tested. So they're not giving anything away out here. But I say that to say we're not, despite the fear mongering that's going on for clickbait, we do need to stand united, be a voice, and join veterans organizations just to support the lobbying to keep our rights. The people who are not veterans and who have never had to fight for their benefits before can be easily persuaded to believe this nonsense, and it's up to us to hold the lines and represent the truth. So the brothers and sisters that follow in our boots don't have to fight another uphill battle that's even worse.
No, I agree. And that's one of the big things where, there's a lot of opportunity out there. There's a ton of different service organizations that are here and are built to help support veterans as well. And I think it's important that everybody should, definitely utilize, every opportunity that's out there at your disposal. At the end of the day, veteran service organizations, VSOs, they're there for a reason, but they're not great, right? They're just like the VA. They're backlogged. They've got hundreds of veterans that they're trying to help as well. So at the end of the day, we're here if you need us. We're happy to help. We are putting out content every day to help educate veterans just like you, to make sure that this information is readily available. And if you need that extra help, definitely feel free, sign up, talk to one of our Pathfinders, and get started today. These lives are going to be weekly now. So if there are specific topics, anything that you want to learn more about, please, drop a comment, let us know. That way we can make sure that the content we're putting out is content that you want to learn more about. Feel free to send us a message if it's something that you don't want to put in as a comment. But again, I'm Eric, TheBeardedVet. This is Donny Whitton. We're glad that y'all were able to be here with us today. And we look forward to talking to y'all next week. So Donny, anything else you want to leave with?
Yeah, I'm Donny, the not as cool of a nickname Whitton. I still can't grow a beard at 45 years old. So, I want to say that one, if you're interested, and even if you're not interested because you have nothing to lose, and pursuing an increase or a new service connection or something like that, file your intent to file. It doesn't cost you anything. It's super easy. It holds your back pay date, and it's not condition specific. So even if you don't know what you're going to file for, call 1-800-827-1000, ask them to register an intent to file. It's that easy. Hang up. You can fax in a VA form 21-0966. That easy. And or you can do it on va.gov by simply starting the claims application and then stop. You don't even have to put a name of a condition. It'll tell you, boop, ITF filed. If you're going for sleep apnea, start pursuing a sleep study ASAP because they're kind of hard to get scheduled for. During that time, start thinking about what is your likely strongest connection theory. Have that in your head because it's good to talk to your sleep doctor about it too during your sleep study. That way they don't put down some random stuff without ever seeing you and saying you're fat, and then you have to get all mad and go have a PTSD moment in the VA hospital. And then last but not least, submit a complete claim before the new rule drops. Maybe you'll be in the 50% based on the new rules. Maybe you won't, but the best bet is to get it in before the new rule drops. But again, that's not going to be tomorrow, like some people are saying. It'll be by the end of the year, most likely. And again, as Eric said, if you want someone to do this with, you want an expert to show you the way, our Pathfinders are here for that. Not everyone is in the same spot, but no matter where you are, that's why we're called Pathfinders. We'll meet you where you are, anywhere, anytime.
All right, brother. Well, I appreciate it. Guys, again, we appreciate you stopping by, spending this 45 minutes with us. We'll see y'all next week. Have a great one.
Thanks, Eric. Love you, bro.
Love you, bro.